sounded like a modern fairy tale when I lucked out and married Reese Smith, setting up shop together on our massive family estate west of Pawhuska. I honestly don't think she ever wants to see another cattle feed bill as long as she lives, so I'm going to spoil the crew with some of her famous ranch-style chicken sandwiches. They are hands down one of my husband's absolute favourite comfort foods, essentially grilled chicken breasts drowning in flavour. But what happens when the pioneer woman, a figure adulated by millions for her charmed existence, runs headfirst into a shattering health crisis that threatens to upend the entire fantasy? Ree Drummond didn't just build a brand. She constructed an impervious empire rooted in wholesome family values and the rugged, unfiltered authenticity of ranch living. However, away from the rolling cameras and perfectly staged photos, the vibe shifted darkly. Her husband, Lad, the stoic granite-jawed cowboy who treats emotions like untrained horses, started making moves that set tongues wagging. If you were paying close attention, the breadcrumbs were there. Strange, cryptic updates on social media and bizarre operational pivots at the Drummond compound signalled that the picture-perfect life was developing cracks. When the shocking reality finally broke the surface, it connected all the dots, explaining exactly why Lad has been slowly, painfully saying his goodbyes. He wasn't just bidding farewell to a routine. He was letting go of the very existence they had built as their beloved ranch transformed overnight into something unrecognisable. You have to understand the stakes here. The Drummond Ranch in Pawhuska, Oklahoma isn't just a farm. It's a dynasty that has operated like a well-oiled machine for over 100 years. Lad Drummond isn't just a manager. He's the heir to a legacy running the show with the same military-grade precision as his forefathers. Cattle drives happen at the crack of dawn. No excuses. Fences get fixed the second they break, and the brutal, beautiful rhythm of ranch life waits for no man, and certainly no tragedy. That is precisely why the gossip mill went into overdrive back in 2023. The veteran ranch hands guys who have seen it all sensed a disturbance in the force. Suddenly, the control freak cowboy started loosening the reins. We're talking about a man who obsessively oversaw every single head of cattle sold, now inexplicably dispatching his brothers to handle the heavy lifting. Those sacred morning rounds, the ones he had religiously performed solo for decades, they were quietly passed off to trusted lieutenants, leaving everyone baffled. At first, the whispers suggested he was finally pumping the brakes after that horrific head-on collision involving a fire truck in 2021, a brush with death that would rattle anyone. But the inner circle knew better. This wasn't a man taking a well-deserved vacation. The ranch dynamic wasn't evolving because Lad wanted a break. It was morphing because it had to. The Drummond Land and Cattle Company is a behemoth sprawling across a staggering 400,000 acres, ranking it among the absolute titans of American land ownership. You don't just phone in a job like that. Wrangling an empire of that magnitude demands blood, sweat, and a physical presence that never sleeps. For a guy like Lad, who has been glued to a saddle since he was a toddler, stepping away wasn't just a schedule tweak, it was an identity crisis. It meant completely rewriting his part in a history book that has been authored by his family for generations. He was forced to confront a new reality. The staff, some of whom have ridden alongside Lad for more than 20 years, started clocking his movements. He began bailing on the workday way earlier in the afternoons. We're talking about a workaholic who used to be out in the pastures until pitch black, checking newborn calves or wrenching on tractors. Suddenly, he's parked in the driveway by 4 or 5 in the evening. His pickup truck, which is usually caked in layers of Oklahoma dust and mud, a badge of honour for a working cowboy, was shockingly clean. Even his boots told a story. Usually scuffed, battered and beaten by the elements, they started looking a little too fresh, showing suspiciously less wear and tear. Let's be clear, these weren't symptoms of laziness. These were the heartbreaking indicators of a man making the brutal choice to prioritise a person over the livestock, someone who needed him far more than the herd did. Now, Pawhuska might be small, but the walls have ears. It's an incredibly tight-knit community where everyone knows everyone's business. Scandal travels faster than a prairie fire out there, especially when the royal family of Osage County, the Drummonds, is involved. The speculation reached a fever pitch. Armchair detectives theorised that Ladd was secretly crippled by lingering pain from that truck crash. Others whispered about potential bankruptcy or financial ruin forcing their hand. Naturally, the tabloids wanted to scream, "Divorce!" But anyone who has ever seen the electric chemistry between Ladd and Rhee knew a split was virtually impossible. The reality, as it turned out, was far simpler and infinitely more devastating than the wild rumours, though the public would be kept in the dark for months. The biggest red flag. When Rhee, the queen of oversharing, suddenly went mute. Rhee Drummond literally monetised her diary. From launching her blog way back in 2006 to dominating the Food Network, churning out bestsellers and flooding our feeds, she has been an open book for nearly 2 decades. Her devoted followers knew exactly what was simmering on the stove, which kid was flunking algebra, and every witty one-liner Ladd dropped over their morning caffeine fix. That radical transparency was her superpower. It made a wealthy ranch wife feel like your next-door neighbour. So when the content drip slowed to a trickle and the post became glossy and staged, the alarm bells rang. Where were the messy kitchen fails? Those signature rambling essays about chaotic ranch mishaps simply vanished into thin air. By the end of 2023, her Instagram grid looked less like a real person's life and more like a PR-managed highlight reel, totally devoid of the grit fans craved. The comment sections turned into a panic room with followers begging to know if the family was safe. Rhee would just drop a generic heart emoji or a vague reassurance, dodging the real talk. The woman who used to broadcast her every thought was suddenly guarding a massive secret. Even the TV show started revealing the cracks in the armour. If you watch the footage aired in 2024 closely, the vibe was off. Rhee brought the charm sure, but her eyes held a weariness that no amount of studio lighting could mask. Behind the scenes, the chaos was palpable. Production schedules were slashed and reorganised to accommodate the unfolding crisis. The powerhouse who could grind through 12-hour filming days without breaking a sweat was suddenly calling cut, needing more breaks, more privacy, and more time away from the lens. Remember her blog, The Pioneer Woman, was the heartbeat of her brand, updated religiously almost every single day for years. That site was ground zero, the place where she first hooked us with recipes served alongside intimate confessions about life with her Marlborough man and their brood. The comment section wasn't just a place for feedback, it was practically a gated community for the obsessives who had been stalking her content since the dinosaur age of blogging. So when the uploads started drying up and the blog turned into a ghost town, those die-hard fans didn't just wonder, they spiralled, knowing deep down that some major drama was unfolding behind the scenes. Rhee has always been the queen of oversharing her struggles, spilling the tea on everything from the nightmare of balancing a career and motherhood to the sheer exhaustion of expanding her business empire. But this silence, this was deafening. It felt deliberate, like she was circling the wagons to hide a bombshell and even her cash cow. The cookbook releases started looking sketchy as the schedule shifted. We are talking about books that were guaranteed bestsellers, packed with those glossy perfect photos and personal anecdotes we all ate up, which she used to drop like clockwork. But suddenly the gaps between launches got wider than the Oklahoma plains and the massive promotional tours were slashed to the bone, with those chaotic signings that used to pack venues reduced to just a handful of exclusive cities. The publishing bigwigs tried to play it cool, but the fan base was absolutely losing it, demanding answers in the forums. This woman, who usually vibrates with the energy of 1,000 suns, was pulling a disappearing act, and the scariest part was that nobody outside her tight-knit inner circle had a clue why she was locking the gates. It wasn't just the books. She basically ghosted the television circuit outside of her own carefully controlled bubble. The morning show gigs, the cute cooking segments with other celebrity chefs, and the lucrative collabs she used to snatch up, she was turning them all down, leaving producers scrambling. Her PR team tried to spin it with the classic scheduling conflicts excuse, but let's be real, that's code for drama. The pattern was undeniable. She was throwing up walls and boundaries in a way we'd never seen before, fiercely guarding her privacy, which screamed that there was a much darker, deeper situation unfolding behind the scenes. Then came the incident that blew the lid off everything, the accident that exposed the cracks in the perfect facade. Before we even touch on the medical diagnosis, we have to talk about the terrifying event that nearly destroyed the Drummond dynasty and proved that their rugged ranch life isn't just a TV aesthetic, it's dangerous as hell. Flashback to March of 2021. Lad and his nephew Caleb were out battling a blaze when disaster struck a head-on collision between their fire trucks that was absolutely carnage. Caleb was in such bad shape, he had to be airlifted immediately to a hospital, leaving everyone on the ranch holding their breath. And Lad being the stubborn cowboy archetype, he has actually refused the ambulance at first and drove himself to the ER only to find out he had broken his neck in 2 separate places. Talk about a close call. Doctors basically told him he used up all his luck just to be standing there walking and talking instead of being paralysed or worse. He went under the knife and ended up stuck in a neck brace, grounded like a teenager. For a guy who treats broken bones and concussions like minor inconveniences, being told to sit down and do nothing was absolute torture. He had to surrender control and let others run the show. But the real juicy story here isn't just his recovery, it's how this near-death experience completely shattered Ree. She stared into the abyss and almost lost her husband, the other half of her brand, and her heart. The man she built a life with, raised a whole brood of children with, and created a multi-million-dollar empire alongside had nearly died right there in the dirt of their own property. That kind of trauma doesn't just fade away. It fundamentally rewires your brain and changes who you are as a person. It makes you look at your fame and fortune and realise it means nothing if your partner is gone. Yet Ree, ever the professional, put on her armour and powered through like she always does. She played nursemaid to Lad during his gruelling recovery, while somehow keeping all her massive business obligations from falling apart. Her social media posts were full of jokes and light-hearted updates framing the horror show as just another quirky ranch adventure, but it was all smoke and mirrors. Insiders weren't buying the happy act, noting the visible toll it took and the genuine fear that settled in her eyes every time Lad walked out the door. She was glued to her phone, obsessed with checking in, terrified of getting that call again. The accident left invisible scars that were eating away at her peace of mind, setting the stage for the next blow, the diagnosis nobody saw coming. Fast forward to early 2024, and during a routine checkup, the other shoe dropped when doctors found something seriously concerning that she had been ignoring. She had been brushing off symptoms as just the price of being a boss babe running multiple businesses, filming a show and wrangling a family would wipe anyone out. But this fatigue was different. It was bone deep, accompanied by persistent headaches she couldn't just shake off with a nap. When she finally stopped being stubborn and got the full workup, the results were a total gut punch that would force her to change everything. The specifics of her condition demanded immediate attention and a radical restructuring of her daily existence. We are talking long-term management, major lifestyle changes, and admitting she has physical limits. A nightmare for a woman whose entire brand is built on effortless perfection. For someone who prides herself on doing it all with a smile, this was devastating news. But the hardest part was realising how this would flip the script on her marriage and family dynamic. Now, Ree has shared plenty of personal drama before, from kidney stones to her foster son's journey, but this situation is in a whole different league. This isn't a fix it and move on scenario. It's not something a quick surgery or a round of antibiotics is going to solve. This is a chronic reality she has to live with forever, a burden she will carry for the rest of her life. It effectively forces Lad to step up and be the caregiver, reversing the roles they have played for decades. The learning curve for this diagnosis was reportedly overwhelming in the beginning. Between the cocktail of new medications, navigating nasty side effects, implementing strict dietary restrictions, and a calendar full of doctor dates, it was a lot to handle. For Ree, who is usually the one saving the day and organising everybody else's lives, admitting she was the one who needed saving was a bitter pill to swallow. She had spent years taking care of everyone else, and suddenly the tables had turned completely. The script has officially flipped, folks, and the ultimate caretaker suddenly became the patient in a twist that sent shockwaves through the family. Doctors dropped a harsh reality check warning that her high-octane stress levels were a ticking time bomb waiting to detonate. You can't make this stuff up. The irony is absolutely brutal. We are talking about stress reduction orders for a mogul whose entire multi-million-dollar brand was built on the superhuman ability to juggle 1 million flaming torches at once without breaking a sweat. Think about the insane workload, the hit television show, the viral blog empire, the endless stream of best-selling cookbooks, the massive mercantile tourism hub, the constant social media feed, and the never-ending family drama. It all created a pressure cooker environment that finally caused her physical health to scream, enough is enough. Something had to snap, and she refused to let it be her life force. The treatment plan, it was described as aggressive, intense, and absolutely non-negotiable if she wanted to survive this spiral. This wasn't a local fix either. It demanded specialists across multiple cities, forcing a jet-setting medical tour that ripped Ree away from the sanctuary of the ranch she worships. And here is where it gets tear-jerking. Lad was right there riding shotgun for every single appointment. Imagine this rugged cowboy sitting in sterile waiting rooms with other terrified spouses, trying to decode medical jargon that sounded more like a horror movie script than a diagnosis. For a guy who can diagnose a sick steer from a mile away, navigating the complex and terrifying world of human healthcare was a learning curve steeper than a canyon wall. But he stepped up and mastered it, because that is exactly what a ride-or-die partner does when the chips are down. But the real tea. The diagnosis was a nightmare of unpredictability that made planning absolutely impossible. Insiders say it was a roller coaster. One day she's conquering the world, and the next, getting out of bed, felt like climbing Everest. The calendar became a minefield where commitments were penciled in with shaky hands. The woman famous for her rock-solid reliability and ability to deliver suddenly couldn't promise she'd be standing upright for events scheduled months down the line. For a control freak, and we say that with love, losing that grip on her own destiny was just as agonising as the physical pain she was enduring. Now let's talk about Lad's impossible dilemma. Lad Drummond isn't just a rancher. He is fourth-generation royalty in the cattle world. This isn't a job for him. It is his entire identity. The ranch life courses through his veins with the same intensity it did for his legendary father and grandfather. For over 50 years, his whole existence has orbited around those pastures that livestock and the heavy burden of a legacy he is sworn to protect and pass on. Walking away from even a fraction of that empire isn't just hard. It feels like a betrayal of everything he was brainwashed to believe about duty, honour and responsibility since birth. But when the medical bombshell dropped, Henri Lad stared down a choice that had absolutely zero to do with beef prices or fence lines. His wife was drowning, and she needed a lifeline in a way she never had before in their decades-long romance. The powerhouse who always held the family together, the organiser, the glue of the Drummond dynasty, was suddenly fragile. And Lad, the stoic cowboy who prefers action over lengthy monologues, didn't hesitate for a second. He began the slow, painful process of saying goodbye to the only life he had ever known. We aren't talking a permanent exit, but he definitely bid farewell to the grueling version of himself that spent every waking moment from sunrise to sunset slaving over the land. He had to shatter the assumption that the ranch was the undisputed king of his priorities. He had to ditch the "that's how we've always done it" tradition that usually rules these old money families. The plot twist involves the rest of the clan too. His brothers shouldered a heavier load, and the kids stepped up to the plate in ways that would make any parent proud. Meanwhile, Lad carved out a new territory in his life that simply didn't exist before, a sacred space dedicated 100% to hovering over Ree and ensuring her recovery. But don't think this was all sunshine and rainbows. There was internal conflict. Lad came from a line of men who worked until they literally dropped. That was the toxic standard of masculinity he grew up idolising, the yardstick he used to measure his own worth as a man and a provider. Choosing to step back while he was still physically a beast felt like a humiliating failure at first, like he was abandoning a post he was sworn to defend. It took some deep, likely emotional conversations with Ree, heart-to-hearts with his brothers, and probably some soul-searching during long, lonely drives across the vast ranch property to finally realise that saving his wife wasn't a sign of weakness or failure. It was a higher calling, a different kind of duty that trumped everything else. And let's give a shout out to his brothers Tim and Todd, the unsung heroes of this transition. They had always been in the mix, but now they were seizing the throne, taking on executive authority that used to belong exclusively to Ladd. We are talking major moves, massive cattle acquisitions, critical land management strategies, and six-figure equipment investments. All those heavy hitter calls that Ladd used to make in solitary confinement were now collaborative group projects. This required a level of trust that does not come easily to a patriarch who has been the supreme commander of the operation for decades. But Ladd learned the art of surrender, letting go piece by piece, delegating not just because he had to, but because he chose love over control and the money talk. That was a huge factor. The Drummond Ranch isn't a hobby farm, it is a massive corporate entity, and Ladd stepping back meant trusting others with the financial destiny of an operation worth untold millions. We are talking about quarterly profit margins, high-stakes market timing for sales, and ruthless negotiations with buyers. These aren't tasks you can fumble without catastrophic consequences, but his brothers proved they were sharks, and the ranch kept printing money, even with Ladd on the sidelines. That financial security was the golden ticket that allowed him to continue prioritising Rhee's health crisis, without the crushing guilt that he was driving the family legacy into bankruptcy. What is truly wild about Ladd's move is how silent he was about it. No press conference, no dramatic social media post begging for sympathy. He just started moving differently. The ranch hands whispered the family saw the shift, but Ladd didn't feel the need to spill his guts or justify his life choices to the gossip mongers. His actions screamed louder than any tabloid headline ever could. And for a man who treats words like a scarce resource, that silent, stoic approach to saving his marriage was absolutely on brand. It really was the ultimate financial empire, a massive kingdom built entirely on a foundation of wide smiles and so-called authenticity. But behind the scenes, while her husband Ladd was desperately trying to keep the ranch operations from falling apart, Rhee was privately facing a nightmare scenario regarding her own massive business dynasty. You have to understand, by the time 2024 rolled around, the Pioneer Woman brand had exploded into something far more monstrous than just a cute little blog and a cooking show. We are talking about the Mercantile in downtown Pawhuska, a retail mecca and restaurant that had obsessed fans making pilgrimages from all corners of the country, plus a massive cookware line dominating shelves at every major retailer you can think of. Then you add in the stack of cookbooks, every single one hitting the bestseller lists, and a television juggernaut on the Food Network that was already deep into its 13th season. And don't forget the endless licensing deals, the lucrative partnerships, and the golden opportunities that come when you are arguably one of the most famous faces in the entire food media landscape. Insiders estimated this empire was worth a jaw-dropping $75 million a fortune, built entirely on Rhee's magnetic personality, her calorie-laden recipes, and her willingness to expose her private life to the hungry public. However, keeping a $75 million machine running smoothly required a relentless non-stop output that would break a normal person. It was a never-ending cycle of blog posts, constant social media updates to feed the algorithm, brutal cookbook deadlines, grueling filming schedules, and exhausting personal appearances. Every single aspect demanded her absolute time and energy, but then came the diagnosis, the bombshell news that made it painfully clear she could no longer keep up with this crushing celebrity pace. The Mercantile, her pride and joy in Pawhuska, presented the most heartbreaking and difficult decisions of all during this tumultuous period. That store had morphed into a full-blown tourist trap, a destination where obsessed superfans travelled thousands of miles just for a chance to breathe the same air as their idol. They all wanted the selfie, the autograph, and the insider gossip about ranch life straight from the Queen herself, but those interactions were draining her life force exactly when she needed to save it. The only way to survive the scandal of a potential health collapse was to create a massive wall of distance, handing over the day-to-day reins to a team of managers. Rhee's personal appearances became rarer than a perfectly cooked steak scheduled sparingly and planned months in advance to avoid any public mishaps. The store managed to stay profitable, thankfully, but the days of her constant smiling presence were over, and the Food Network show was facing a similar behind-the-scenes shake-up. Filming a single season used to require months of back-breaking labour, intense recipe testing, dozens of takes, and the stamina to smile for the camera for hours on end. But now the production teams had to bend the knee, accommodating her needs with much shorter filming days and frequent breaks to keep the star from collapsing. Episodes were strategically planned in batches, allowing Ree to film only when she felt strong enough to perform and to hide away and recover when the bad days hit. Luckily, the show's format had always been casual ranch vibes, which made these desperate adjustments much easier to hide than if she were working on a polished studio set. Even the ironclad cookbook contracts had to be ripped up and renegotiated, with deadlines that used to be set in stone suddenly becoming very flexible. The big-time publishers knew the score. They understood that a Ree Drummond book was worthless without her specific voice stories and sparkling personality woven into the pages. Rushing the process just to hit an arbitrary release date would have resulted in a disaster that could tarnish the brand forever. So, in a rare move for the cutthroat publishing industry, everyone agreed to pump the brakes, prioritising the Queen's health over the quarterly profits. What is truly fascinating is how these forced business changes actually aligned perfectly with the massive shifts happening across the entire media and influencer landscape. The toxicity of hustle culture and constant content creation was finally dying out, replaced by buzzy conversations about sustainability and work-life balance. Influencers everywhere were hitting the wall and burning out left and right, sparking a major industry crisis. Content creators started spilling the tea on their mental health struggles, and surprisingly, audiences were becoming more forgiving when their favourite stars needed to vanish for a while. Ree's decision to step back while driven by a scary medical necessity actually made her look like a trendsetter ahead of a massive cultural shift. And here is the kicker. The financial fallout from these drastic changes was nowhere near as catastrophic as the accountants feared. While the volume of content from the Drummond camp went down, the perceived value of every single project skyrocketed. A cookbook that was released after careful curation performed way better than a rushed cash grab, and TV episodes filmed when Ree was genuinely happy were vastly superior to the ones forced during her darkest days. The lesson for the industry was crystal clear: pumping out more content isn't always the answer to staying relevant. True sustainable success means you have to protect the golden goose, which in this high-stakes scenario was Ree herself. Then there is the family drama of it all. Everyone watched as the Drummond kids, now all grown up, rallied around the throne in a way that proved their loyalty. Alex, who had escaped the ranch to start her own life, suddenly began making frequent hush-hush trips back home to be by her mother's side. Paige quietly adjusted her entire schedule, stepping in to handle the domestic burdens that her mother used to juggle without breaking a sweat. Bryce and Todd, the boys who stayed close to the nest, took on heavy responsibilities around the ranch and the family businesses to free up their father to deal with the crisis. What is truly remarkable is the code of silence. The Drummonds have locked down the details like a fortress, keeping their private struggles completely out of the tabloids. They continue to feed us the highlight reel, the good moments, the funny bloopers, and the beautiful filtered parts of ranch life. But the gritty reality, the real struggles, and the tears, those remain locked behind the gates of the ranch, and this health scare was no exception. Alex, the eldest daughter and essentially the heir apparent, has always had an incredibly tight bond with her mother, often sharing the spotlight on the show. When the whispers about Ree's health turned into serious concern, Alex dropped everything to visit, not for the cameras, but to simply exist in the house. She started taking over the unglamorous tasks, the small things that usually go unnoticed, but were now critical to keeping the household running. We are talking about organising the messy pantry and prepping ingredients for recipe tests, doing the grunt work so the Queen could rest, or simply putting her own life on pause to be her mother's shadow during these brutal days. Paige, who had just escaped to college to chase her own dreams, found herself in a gut-wrenching position. She was stuck in that terrifying limbo, old enough to fully grasp the grim reality of the medical charts, yet young enough that watching her invincible mother crumble was absolutely devastating. Paige didn't just sit around crying. She channeled her grief into hustle, stepping up to manage the chaotic administrative nightmare behind the family's massive business empire. She became the gatekeeper ghostwriting social media posts when her mum was too drained to lift a phone and standing guard to handle crises at a moment's notice. This wasn't just growing up, it was a forced evolution that stripped away her carefree youth and matured her faster than any normal quarter-life crisis ever could. Then there's Bryce, the golden boy, who has always been Lad's shadow. With the patriarch distracted by the terrifying health battle, Bryce didn't just help, he effectively seized the throne. We're talking about a complete takeover. He shouldered the back-breaking physical labour that usually wrecked his father and sat at the head of the table for high-stakes decisions. He silenced the critics and proved to everyone watching that this ranching dynasty has a successor with enough grit to carry the legacy for another century. His willingness to bear that crushing weight gave Lad the ultimate luxury, the freedom to stop being a businessman and just be the husband holding his wife's hand. And let's not forget Todd, the foster son, who became family. He didn't just accept the adoption, he paid it back with interest, becoming the absolute rock the family didn't know they needed. He was in the trenches with Bryce, running the unglamorous errands and anticipating needs before anyone even voiced them. No drama, just pure loyalty. His quiet strength was a massive slap in the face to anyone who thinks DNA is the only thing that binds the family together. It turns out real family status is earned in the hospital waiting rooms and the hard days, not just given at birth. The way the Drummond kids handled this bombshell diagnosis revealed the ironclad character Ree and Lad built. They didn't fall apart or make it the me show. You didn't see them airing their dirty laundry or posting tearful selfies for sympathy likes on social media, which is practically unheard of in celebrity culture today. They just put their heads down and handled business, mirroring the stoic work ethic they'd watched their parents display behind closed doors for decades. Now let's talk about the headlines. When people hear Lad is saying goodbye, the rumour mill goes crazy, assuming the absolute worst case scenario is unfolding. But hold your horses, because the truth is much deeper, more nuanced, and honestly a lot more emotional than a simple farewell. He is waving goodbye to the toxic hustle culture that defined him. He's burying the dangerous belief that being a man means destroying your body for the job. The old school cowboy code, working until you drop dead in the saddle and never uttering a complaint, is officially being retired. It took a terrifying wake-up call to shake them to their core and force a total re-evaluation of what actually matters in this short life. Don't worry about the fortune. The ranch is in capable hands, and the massive culinary empire rebuilt will keep printing money under teams that know the vision. But the era of martyrdom is over. The days where they sacrificed their health and sanity on the altar of success are officially history. They are architecting a completely new lifestyle focused on intimacy, reducing stress, and actually letting other people carry the load for once. For a power couple that has spent 30 years being the unshakable pillars everyone else leans on, this is a massive identity crisis. Becoming the ones who need help after decades of being the providers is a bitter pill to swallow for these strong personalities. But they're doing it anyway, because the alternative, continuing that breathless pace while ignoring reality, is a one-way ticket to disaster. Lad is having to completely deconstruct his ego, realising his value as a human isn't calculated by his productivity or how hard he grinds on the ranch. We're talking about a guy whose reputation was built on being the first boots on the ground at dawn and the last one leaving the barn at midnight. The man who treated vacations like a sin, never called in sick, and treated personal feelings as a distraction from the bottom line. But that stoic workaholic robot simply couldn't be the tender present caregiver that Reed desperately needs in this fragile season. So he flipped the script. He's taking actual days off, showing up to social events and jet-setting to specialists with things the old lad would have scoffed at. A few years ago, seeing him leave the ranch for anything other than business would have been absolutely unthinkable. Every single yes to life is a definitive goodbye to the rigid military-like structure that ruled his existence for decades. It's a deliberate choice to save his marriage instead of his work schedule. And for Ree, her version of goodbye is just as gut-wrenching. She has to wave farewell to her superwoman complex, the obsession with being the reliable saviour for every single person in her orbit. The CEO who never drops a ball, the mom with the bottomless energy tank, that persona has to die so the real woman can survive. The perfectly polished media darling who is always on for the cameras. It turns out she was running on fumes way longer than she ever admitted to her fans. Keeping up that perfect charade was simply no longer physically possible without risking everything. Together they are shattering the unrealistic pedestals they put themselves on, rejecting the idea that they must handle the world without assistance. They are unlearning the toxic belief that asking for a helping hand is a sign of moral failure or weakness. That crushing pressure to keep up the perfect country life facade helped them build a dynasty, sure, but it was eating them alive from the inside. Those old survival mechanisms that built the empire became the very roadblocks preventing them from healing and moving forward. Fast forward to now, and the Drummond clan has essentially rebooted their entire operating system to match this heavy new reality. Ree is still the queen of the kitchen, dropping recipes and connecting with us, but the rules have changed. She's doing it on her timeline and nobody else's. Lad Drummond hasn't hung up his spurs just yet. Oh no, he is still out there kicking up dust and living that rugged cowboy fantasy we all swoon over. But let's be real, the narrative has shifted drastically. The power couple has had to completely rewrite their script, finding a new normal that frankly looks nothing like the picture-perfect empire they spent years building. That heart-stopping diagnosis didn't just rattle their cage, it threatened to burn the whole house down. Yet, in a twist nobody saw coming, it turned out to be the wake-up call they were desperate for. Suddenly, the glossy magazine covers didn't matter, as they were forced into brutal late-night talks about the scary stuff mortality, who gets the keys to the kingdom, and what actually counts when the cameras stop rolling. Make no mistake, they would not have picked this drama for themselves in a million years, but they are navigating this minefield hand in hand, leaning on that rock-solid bond that has been their trademark since way back in 1996. Step behind the scenes today and you will see a schedule that has been completely flipped on its head compared to their old chaotic lifestyle. Sure, the alarm still rings at an ungodly hour. Old ranch habits die hard after all, but the frantic, mad dash out the door that is strictly a thing of the past. Now, there is a tender new ritual in the mix, lad, ensuring his leading lady has her meds before he even thinks about saddling up, and they are actually sitting down for breakfast together, a luxury that used to be reserved for Christmas morning. These aren't just throwaway moments anymore. They are the main event, and those little sparks of intimacy are finally getting the screen time they deserve, prioritised way above the relentless business demands. Don't get it twisted, the cattle still need tending, but the days of Lad Drummond being the first hero on a horse at dawn, that scene has been cut from the daily vlog. The supporting cast, his brothers and the loyal ranch hands have stepped into the spotlight, running the show with a rhythm that doesn't require the boss man to micromanage every single beat. Lad has transitioned into more of an executive producer role, checking in and dropping wisdom when necessary, but ultimately having faith that the machine will not crash without him at the wheel. Earning that level of freedom wasn't easy. It was a battle, but it has given him the space to focus on the real priority. And speaking of priorities, have you noticed how Ree's content has shifted gears? Gone are the days of churning out posts just to feed the algorithm beast. Now she only breaks her silence when she actually has something profound or juicy to spill to her millions of followers. And for the critics worrying about the food, relax, because the culinary magic has not lost a single ounce of flavour. If anything, the dishes are hitting harder than ever because she is scrutinising every teaspoon and only sharing the absolute winners, and her fan base isn't dumb. They have clocked the change and are absolutely living for this new era. It turns out the public loves a little vulnerability, and there is something incredibly refreshing about an icon admitting that being Superwoman just isn't sustainable anymore. As for their empire, the mercantile is still the hottest ticket in Pahooska, packing in tourists and keeping the local economy spinning like a top. The shocking part The place hums along perfectly without the Queen of the Drummond Castle holding court every day because her squad knows exactly how to keep the brand sparkling and the visitors dazzled. Ree makes a cameo appearance when the mood strikes, or her energy allows essentially leaving the heavy lifting to her staff while she plays the role of the beloved, elusive matriarch. And here is the sweet tea lad. And Ree are finally ticking boxes off that bucket list they ignored for decades while they were too busy chasing the almighty dollar. We are talking about secret little getaways, no private jets or five-star excesses, just intimate escapes to reconnect away from prying eyes. It is strictly about unplugging from the ranch drama and the relentless business grind. But Lad isn't waving a white flag on their marriage or their lifestyle. He is, however, ruthlessly killing off his old ego, the one that believed being a tough guy meant working until you drop, never asking for backup and ignoring his own needs. In flipping that script, he is displaying a level of grit we haven't seen before, redefining what it actually means to be the man of the house. Real power is recognising when the walls are closing in and having the guts to tear them down and rebuild. That is the brave new world they are living in. Forget the tabloids. This is the true transformation happening behind closed doors. It isn't an ending, it is a metamorphosis. What is your take on Lad Drummond's shocking new approach to life? Spill your thoughts in the comment section below. We want to hear your theories. And hey, if you live for these celebrity deep dives, smash that like button and hit subscribe to join our community. For more scandalous details and heartwarming twists just like this one, do not hesitate to click on the next video flashing on your screen right now. Trust me, you won't believe what secrets we uncover next.